This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour and welcome to Unique Scotland, the go-to podcast on all things Scottish. And I'm delighted to have you with me for this bonus episode in my podcast series. As my regular listeners will know, I've just completed a 3-part series on Glasgow, Scotland's largest city. And to finish off, I was going to bring you the amazing story of Glasgow's rise to become the second city of the British Empire through its incredible shipbuilding economy. However, a few weeks ago I returned from New York and I was absolutely buzzing after my first visit to the Big Apple, to such an extent that I'm inserting a bonus podcast detailing my experience in the city and the excitement of being part of Tartan Week, when thousands of Scots pour into the city to join thousands more Scottish diaspora who come from all over America to enjoy this bagpiping, drum thumping, highland dancing, whisky drinking throng. I mean, it was just incredible. And there's some great footage of the march on my Facebook page and Instagram, and I'll be sharing some of the sounds on this podcast. I actually marched up 6th Avenue in a kilt behind the banner of the American Scottish Foundation, a wonderful organisation that helps to keep the Scottish-American connection alive. As I record this, I'm back in my home village of Aberlady, and the sun is beaming in through the window, and it's only 6:15 a.m. It's great to see the early morning and late evening light again after such a long winter. Well, today it's around 12 degrees centigrade, and Minnie, my spaniel, is at my side, waiting patiently for her walk down to the waterfront and nature reserve, and that's what I'll be doing during the break from recording. In my last episode on Glasgow, I explained the Clockwork Orange underground system, or subway, and you learned about the Glasgow Tower at the Science Centre, which is in the Guinness Book of World Records, as well as many of the fabulous art galleries in the city. So do have a listen to that episode if you've not already done so. Indeed, it's intriguing as to just how similar Glasgow and New York are. Admittedly, we don't have the 100-floor skyscrapers, but like New York, the buildings are relatively new and both cities are built on a grid system, and New Yorkers would not feel out of place in Glasgow. Well, I've got a ton of photos of New York on my website to complement this podcast, so have a look and enjoy the spectacle. Well, let me share my experience of New York with you, not just Tartan Week, but my overall visit, which was a whirlwind of both tourist sites and off-the-beaten-track places, which were just as wonderful. So, wherever you are in the world, I would now like you to relax and to join me on this bonus episode podcast, A Scotsman in New York. Considering I had visited the United States of America a number of times, it was surprising to some that I'd never been to New York. I did try to visit a number of years ago when I booked a trip for 2 weeks, but literally 3 days before the trip, I had severe stomachache and after a visit to the doctor was diagnosed with a burst appendix, and that put paid to the trip. Well, after that, I suppose I just did not get round to rebooking a holiday to the Big Apple, and it was not until an opportunity arose to join the American Scottish Foundation during New York's Tartan Week that I decided to take the plunge, book my tickets, and head once more to America and, at last, to New York. My partner Pam joined me on this adventure and was smiling at my military-style planning that went into the holiday. I decided to use a holiday destination company called Audley Travel, that's A-U-D-L-E-Y, Audley Travel, who offer trips to destinations worldwide and have offices in Oxfordshire, London and Boston. I used them a few years ago to plan my trips to India and China, and they were superb, so I had no hesitation in having them arrange my US trip. Pam was smiling slightly because although Audley had provided a great itinerary, I put on my professional tourist guide hat and typed this up in the correct tour plan format, something I always do for the clients holidaying in Scotland. So some of the actions which went into our holiday list were as follows. Plugs and adapters, must buy dollars, credit card, talk to the bank to make sure they know I'm using it abroad, reconfirm excursions organised by Audley, mobile phone, turn off roaming, in fact, buy a bolt-on, restaurant reservations, theatre reservations, download a travel app, Oh, download Uber app, passport and visa, and make sure you've applied for an ESTA before going to America. Talk to the doctor before you travel. Confirm flight seating once more. Medications, make sure you take enough with you. And then last, but certainly not least, contact Laurie Norris, who was one of my clients from last year, who was going to meet us in New York and give us a tour, and I'll tell you all about that reunion later. It was lovely. So, our adventure began on the 3rd of April 2025, when my Delta Airlines aircraft took off from Edinburgh at 9 in the morning, and around 6 hours later we landed at JFK International Airport. It was 11:30 a.m. I was buzzing with excitement, and as soon as we collected our bags, we headed to the exit to find a yellow cab, something I'd only ever seen on television. And as soon as I saw it, I was transported back to a film I'd seen called Love Actually, which is a 2003 British Christmas romantic comedy, and it's a film written and directed by Richard Curtis. It has a number of brilliant actors starring Hugh Grant, Liam Neeson, Emma Thompson, Colin Firth, to name but a few. But one actor in particular stood out for me, and he was Chris Marshall, who played Colin Frissell, who, after unsuccessfully attempting to date various British women, decides that he's on the wrong continent and needs to go to America, convinced that his Britishness and cute British accent will be a total asset. Well, he lands in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he hails a yellow cab and asks the driver to take him to the nearest bar. The driver asks, "What bar?" And Colin says, "Any bar." Well, you'll have to watch the film yourself to see the hilarious and successful attempt to date some young American women in a Milwaukee bar. Well, having been transported to that yellow cab moment, I opened the door and got in. Then I said to the driver, assuming he'd seen the film, "Take me to a bar." Well, I got the strangest look, and the New York taxi driver, of Indian descent as it happened, asked me to insert the directions into his Google search. And that was my first contact with the city. Not exactly as I'd imagined it, but fun nevertheless. And as you can imagine, Pam could not contain her laughter. Actually, I used a lot of taxis over the next week during my visit to the city, and always tried to engage the driver to get his take on New York. Every single one was an immigrant from either India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Morocco, and one or two other places. One or two were very quiet. One was very happy to point out all the sights along the route, while one gave us the history of his life from escaping terror in his own country to the freedoms of the United States of America. The overwhelming impression that I gained was that they were all grateful for a new start in life and were delighted with, and I quote, being left alone to get on with their lives. Well, my first impressions of the drive from JFK to Manhattan was of a teeming city, and of course the area around the airport's a huge building site at the moment, followed by a sprawling suburban area until in the distance you can see the skyscrapers of Manhattan, and then the excitement really starts to mount. During the taxi ride, I was actually following the route on my Google Maps and was delighted to see the areas that we were travelling through, and these were places I'd heard of or seen on some television programme. Off to the left of the screen I could see Brooklyn, which reminded me of a film I'd seen a few years ago called Brooklyn Gangsters, and you often wonder how true life is depicted in such an area. It also made me think of David Beckham, England's most famous footballer, married to Victoria, one of the Spice Girls, and their son Brooklyn Beckham was apparently conceived in that area. Then the taxi driver told us we were driving through Queens, which is the largest borough in New York, spanning over 108 square miles. The other boroughs include Brooklyn, which I've just bypassed, Staten Island, the Bronx, and of course Manhattan, which is where our hotel was. What I had read before coming to America was that Queens is the most ethnically diverse urban area in the world, with over 130 languages spoken. I mean, that's just quite incredible. Of course, my interest in Scottish and British history took me to a connection with this area, and I was amazed to discover that the Queens was established in 1683, named after Catherine of Braganza, and she was the Queen of England, effectively the Queen Consort of King Charles II of England. Now, if I may digress just for a moment, his brother, Charles I, was actually beheaded a few years earlier when Oliver Cromwell came to power, and we had a republic for about 10 years. When Cromwell died, then Charles II was restored. The Restoration, he was restored to be the king. So you can see even here in Queens, the connection with British history. Fabulous. Well, before we knew it, we were crossing over the East River onto South Bronx and then to the Robert Kennedy Bridge, crossing the Harlem River, before arriving into Manhattan and our hotel called the Kimberly Apartments on East 50th Street, just off Lexington Avenue. It used to make me smile when I heard people talking about New York and the numbering system of the streets, and I used to wonder why they just didn't give them all names. as we have in Glasgow, for example. But when you realise New York is literally crammed into a relatively small island called Long Island, then you realise that it was probably the only way to go when it came to defining exactly where a particular building was. And it was relatively easy to get the hang of, and after a couple of days I felt quite at home telling the cab driver to take me to East 50th, just off Lexington. So, we'd arrived, and first impressions? Well, everything is just so big. Huge cars, huge buses, huge trucks, and massive skyscrapers. And I'm sure I was like most tourists on the first arrival in New York, standing in awe, just looking up and wondering how on earth could someone build such massive buildings. Well, we dumped our bags in the room and went for a quick walk just to get the feel of the place. And it wasn't just the size of the building that impressed, but the different shapes as well. It was as if the architects were competing to create the most extraordinary effects on the eye. Height was certainly one of the things that impressed me, but the strangest shape that I saw was the Louis Vuitton building that actually looks like a Louis Vuitton suitcase. Brown in colour with the LV logo on the side, and even buckles and straps around the building, giving the impression of being an actual suitcase. Incredible. Who would think of such a thing? Then all of a sudden, a siren from a police car and an ambulance trying to thread their way through the packed traffic. It was hard going, but the sirens continued to sound, and car horns were being pressed very hard to move the traffic aside. Eventually, space was found, and the emergency service vehicles shot past to attend to their call-out. And then I found it, a real American deli. We'd been looking for somewhere to have a snack, and Pam then suddenly pointed out a building behind a load of scaffolding. Well, I wasn't totally convinced until, of course, we arrived. Now, we'd eaten well on the plane on the way across, but this was something else, and the deli did not disappoint. Rows of different breads, wonderful fillings, hot pies, homemade sauces, salads of every type, fruits to die for, including exotic fruits, and then I spied my favourite, avocado. Now, I'm sure my British listeners will at some point in the past have had a discussion about portion size in America, which tends to be 2, 3 or even 4 times the size of the portions in UK. Now, I'm not complaining. Indeed, the wonderful thing about America is that if you can't finish what you have in front of you, then you'll get a doggy bag, something that was, up until recently anyway, frowned upon in this country. When my avocado, tomato, salad and meat sandwich arrived, it was awesome, to such an extent that I had to take photographs immediately and send them back home. And it wasn't just the size of the sandwich, it was the amount of avocado on the bread that took me aback. In this country, you'll normally get a slither of avocado with a bit of tomato and perhaps a wee bit salad, and that's it. But I watched the chef take 3 full ladlefuls of beautiful avocado and press it onto the bread before then adding all the other ingredients, and then squashing down the top layer, squeezing out avocado at the sides before cutting it in half and handing it to me in a beautifully presented box. Actually, my mouth's watering now as I talk about this. I'm smiling to myself because this is only day 1, so let me tell you a little more about the rest of the visit. We'd only been walking the streets for a couple of hours, but it felt like ages when we eventually returned to our hotel to prepare for an evening engagement. I've already mentioned that we were here to participate in New York's Tartan Week under the banner of the American Scottish Foundation. Well, this wonderful organisation had a number of events going on during the week, the first of which was a supper club, which was to take place at the University Club on West 54th Street at 8 p.m. It was going to be a long night, and I could already feel jet lag starting to take effect, but the excitement of being in New York, the city that never sleeps, kept that at bay. We got into our traditional Scottish evening wear with a kilt, black Bonnie Prince Charlie jacket and bow tie, and Pam was wearing a long black evening gown with a Mackay tartan sash. And we left for the University Club. I'll talk a bit more about the club later because I dined there a few nights later with my lovely friend Laurie Norris and Deborah. The American Scottish Foundation's Scottish Supper Club was quite an event, with a dinner to start and then Scottish performers on stage entertaining the assembled crowd. It was all a bit surreal having landed only a few hours ago and finding myself in this lovely city at a wonderful venue, in my kilt, surrounded by like-minded Scots and many American Scots who form the huge Scottish diaspora in the United States. The food was wonderful and overseen by the National Chef of Scotland, Gary McLean. We were entertained by Noisemaker, an award-winning writing partnership of actor Scott Gilmore and composer Claire Mackenzie. Also on the bill was the lovely Ainsley Hamill, one of UK's leading and most diverse singers. And we also had the amazing Jai McDowell, whose wonderful powerhouse vocals gave us some traditional Scottish music. And if you look on my Facebook page, there's a nice photograph of Jai and I, and he has a flag of America draped over his shoulders. We also had Callum Pasca on the Scottish fiddle, with musical selections that inspired Robert Burns. Well, what a start to our week in New York, and then it was time to return to the hotel. The following morning, I was up early, a man on a mission, hoping to see some tapestries at the Metropolitan Museum Cloisters, or the Met Cloisters as it's known locally. And this had been on my bucket list for a number of years. And before I tell you about Met Cloisters, I'd like to take you back to Stirling Castle, which I visited on numerous occasions with many American guests, and I've always been intrigued by a wonderful set of tapestries in the Queen's bedchamber. That Queen is Mary de Guise, who was married to James V of Scotland, and they were parents to Mary Queen of Scots. The tapestries in Stirling depict the hunt of the unicorn, and they are copies of a series of 7 tapestries to be found in Met Cloisters. The originals were made in the late 15th century in the Netherlands. I have to say, the Stirling copies are fabulous. They took 14 years to weave and brought together 18 weavers from across the globe. The project was commissioned by Historic Scotland in 2001 as part of an effort to restore the King's Palace to its 1540s style. And to assist with the project, there were a number of visits to the Met Cloisters to research the original tapestries, which gave great insight into the making of these wonderful wall hangings. So, yellow cab secured, off we went to Fort Tryon Park to the north of Manhattan to find this extraordinary building called the Met Cloisters. When I got out of the taxi, I truly believed I was standing in front of a medieval monastery, only to discover that Met Cloisters had actually been built in 1938. I have to say it's an architectural wonder, incorporating several styles including Romanesque and Gothic architecture to reflect the various aspects of medieval European culture. And inside there's over 5,000 works of art, including tapestries, metalworks and religious artefacts. Really extraordinary and quite wonderful. I have to admit that I shot past most of these wonderful works of art and headed for the room containing the 7 magnificent tapestries depicting the hunt for the unicorn. I stood there spellbound at the radiant colours, an incredible work of art dating back nearly 500 years. I discovered that this set of tapestries were first recorded in 1680 in the Paris home of the Rochefoucauld family, albeit they were looted during the French Revolution. And interestingly enough, they were rediscovered in a barn in the 1850s and then subsequently hung at the original family's Château de Verteuil. There's a number of theories as to what the tapestries represent, and the one that is most prominent is that these are an allegory of Christ. In medieval times, for example, the unicorn was accepted as a symbol of Christ, and the subsequent pursuit of the unicorn by the hunters killing it, and then it coming back to life, is a metaphor for the arrest, crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I've put up photographs of the tapestries on my website, which you can have a look at, but if you simply Google Hunt for the Unicorn Tapestry, and you'll see exactly why I've got so excited about it. I was still a bit starstruck when we left Met Cloisters and made our way back to the centre of Manhattan, where we had a quiet lunch at Bryant Park, where Tartan Week had already got off to a good start, with some highland dancers and pipe bands performing, and it was glorious sunshine, with the crowds relaxing in the park. We found another deli selling delicious avocado sandwiches, and around 3 p.m. we made our way to the Empire State Building, where we'd booked a visit to the famous platform where Tom Hanks met Meg Ryan in the film Sleepless in Seattle. Now, if any of my younger listeners have not seen this film, then get onto your film provider and watch this wonderful feel-good film with your partner. Popcorn, ice cream and your favourite drink will be required, and perhaps some tissues for the weepy parts. Okay, back to reality and the Empire State. So, now understanding the street numbering system, I looked for 5th Avenue and 33rd Street, which is Midtown, South Manhattan. Pam got very excited when we came across the famous Macy's store, and we just had to do a detour to pop inside for a few moments. I'd only just turned my back when I heard the tinkling of piano music, and there was Pam jumping around like a mad person in a tunnel which had some large piano keys on the floor. And what she was doing was reenacting a scene in the film Big from 1988, where once more Tom Hanks played this piano by dancing around on it. Now, I've never seen this film, so to me it was all a bit strange, but Pam seemed to be enjoying herself, and it took me a while to drag her away towards our real destination of the Empire State Building. At 102 stories and a height of 1,454 feet tall, the Empire State is now only the 59th tallest building in the world. The tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa building in Dubai, which is in the United Arab Emirates, and that stands at 2,722 feet. Actually, the tallest building in New York is the One World Trade Center at 1,776 feet. If I can just refer now to Scotland, our tallest tower is the Glasgow Tower, part of the Science Centre, and that's 416 feet. Now, I can imagine one or two of you out there giggling at my mention of this tower when compared to the other incredibly high towers in the world. However, before you get ahead of yourself, I'd like to point out that our tower is the only structure on Earth capable of rotating 360 degrees into the prevailing wind and holds the Guinness World Record for the tallest fully rotating freestanding structure in the world. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, these numbers are most impressive, but I think what impresses me most about the Empire State was the short amount of time that it took to build. Construction commenced on March 17th, 1930 and completed on May the 1st, 1931. On the ground floor as you enter, there's a fabulous exhibition explaining the build of this amazing skyscraper. When you enter the lift, the video displays on the walls and ceiling, giving the impression of you rising to the top while the building is under construction around you. It's quite something, and the floor you eventually come out onto gives the impression of a building site, and the walls act like a screen, showing the workmen on girders or the metal stanchions that hold the building together. One of the screens shows a workman standing by a brazier with red-hot rivets. He takes one of these rivets and tosses it over to another colleague who had a large canvas bag, caught the rivet in the canvas bag, took it out and placed it into the hole of the girders or metal beams that were then connected together. And all the while a cacophony of noise with cranes and building sounds, giving the impression of you being right in the middle of the construction. And then what we'd all been waiting for, out onto the famous platform where so many iconic films have been made, such as Sleepless in Seattle, as I mentioned, and King Kong. And what a wonderful sight around the whole of New York. Well, that's one more thing off my bucket list, and I would strongly recommend you visit this iconic building if you're in New York. What a lovely way to end our day, so a quiet stroll in spring sunshine back to our hotel allowed us to rest before the main event the following day, which was the Tartan Parade. The following morning we made our way from the Kimberley on 50th Street to the Algonquin Hotel on 44th Street with 6th Avenue. There we met members of the American Scottish Foundation and its president Camilla Hellman, and we were delighted to see some of the performers from our first night at the Scottish Supper Club gathering around the American Scottish Foundation banner. Actually, before we arrived at the meeting point, we could already hear the sound of bagpipes drifting across the city. And the sight that met us when we arrived was incredible, with highland dancers, pipe bands, kilts of all colours, tartan trews or trousers, and hundreds of Scottish saltire flags being waved by the participants and spectators alike. The origins of New York Tartan Day go back to 1998, when the US Senate approved a Tartan Day celebration for New York City. And the first Tartan Day parade took place that year and consisted of 2 pipe bands and a small but spirited group of Scottish Americans, including Grand Marshal Cliff Robertson, who walked from the British Consulate to the United Nations. Well, it has certainly flourished, and today there are thousands of participants with pipe bands, Scottish Highland dancers, clan associations and individual marchers proudly wearing their Scottish regalia and being cheered on by huge crowds who line 6th Avenue, and I was about to become part of it. As an aside, numerous Scottish groups and societies throughout Canada and America have taken the anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath, which was April the 6th, 1320, as their national date to celebrate their Scottish roots, while Tartan Day is now celebrated throughout the United States, with the largest celebration being this very one, the New York Tartan Day Parade. Our Grand Marshal this year was Alan Cumming, OBE. He's a Tony Award-winning actor and comedian, and there he was right at the front leading the parade with a most welcoming crowd cheering us on as we marched. I have to say I loved every minute of it and was touched by the warmth of the welcome from New Yorkers. I was also amazed at the large number of bystanders wearing some sort of tartan and waving the Scottish saltire flag. So thank you to New York for taking us to your hearts, and I do hope to see you again next year, same time, same place. After the march, we all dispersed, but the American Scottish Foundation had organised a wee schwalle, or a small swallow, which effectively is a drink of the amber nectar or scotch, as well as many other alcoholic beverages. It was a lovely time to get to know some of the locals with Scottish roots, as well as meeting some fellow Scots who'd flown over for the occasion. One local that I met was Jeff Goodman, who, in my opinion, is the quintessential New Yorker. He's a real estate agent, but not just in New York, but he has a network, national and international, of over 550 brokerages in over 70 countries. And what I loved about Jeff's approach to New York real estate is the tours that he conducts around different districts of the city, followed by a reception for the group. And I was just sorry that I could not be part of one, as his knowledge of New York was exceptional. Anyway, I'm hoping to team up with Jeff to do a podcast together, so watch this space. Well, we couldn't stay too long at the drinks venue because that evening we were going to attend Carnegie Hall and see a show called The Hoolie. As it happened, another reason for holidaying in New York was that on the 8th of April it was my birthday, and my son Paul bought tickets for us to go and see this spectacular show at one of the most spectacular venues in New York, Carnegie Hall. It's quite strange really, because I was in Carnegie Hall in Dunfermline in the county of Fife in Scotland only the previous week, and the reason that there's a Carnegie Hall in Scotland is that Dunfermline City is the birthplace of the famous industrialist Andrew Carnegie. I was taking some clients to the house where he was born, which is now a museum, and we also visited Carnegie Hall that day. So to be attending the Carnegie Hall of New York for my birthday was quite something. Now, coming back to the show itself, which is billed as a hoolie, well, a hoolie in Scots effectively is a party where singing and dancing and general revelry are the norm. And Scotland's hoolie in New York was an evening of vibrant Scottish music and culture, showcasing talent from Scotland. Our Grand Master for the Tartan Parade, Alan Cumming, was the master of ceremonies, introducing performances from some of Scotland's folk royalty, including the award-winning group Manran, vocalist Julie Fowlis, the Lorettes, and Dougie MacLean, who wrote the famous song Caledonia, to name just a few. And once more, we were treated to the hospitality of local New Yorkers who were enjoying the music and embracing the Scottish culture. What a night. Well, the following morning, it was an early start, and we took an hour taxi drive all the way down to Battery Park to meet our guide Nina, who was a licensed New York guide, and she was going to take us on the ferry to Liberty Island. Of course, Battery Park refers to the waterfront, which would have had a battery of guns protecting the shoreline from would-be invaders. We eventually boarded the ferry, which I have to say was crammed full of people who were about to take the short crossing from New York Island to Liberty Island to get up close to the most famous statue in the world. My first impression of the Statue of Liberty was that it was truly awesome. I mean, it's truly colossal, and you just cannot fail to be impressed. The true name is Liberty Enlightening the World, with the torch in the right hand of the statue providing that light. The statue is a classically draped woman, apparently inspired by the Roman goddess of liberty. On her head she wears a crown, and in her right hand the torch. In her left hand she's actually carrying a tablet with the date of 4th of July 1776 inscribed on it. Although it's difficult to see, I was intrigued at the base of the statue where her left foot is stepping on a broken chain and shackle, indicating freedom and the abolition of slavery. The statue was actually a gift from the people of France, which did surprise me, and the design was by a French sculptor, Bertoli. But the metal framework that gives structure to the statue was built by Gustave Eiffel, of course, the man who built the famous Eiffel Tower, and it was dedicated in 1886. I think seeing the statue from a boat is one thing, but it's not until you land on Liberty Island itself that you get a true feeling of the size of this gargantuan statue. And there's a certain beauty to seeing it so close up, especially having seen it hundreds of times in photos or videos on television and cinema screens. But nothing beats looking up and seeing this wonderful structure towering above you. And if I was feeling emotional about being so close to this wonderful statue, then our next port of call was Ellis Island, a short boat ride from Liberty Island, which was once the busiest immigration inspection and processing station in the United States. The name Ellis Island surprisingly comes from a Welshman, Samuel Ellis, who bought the island in 1774. A few years later, it became a fort. Then in 1897, it opened as an immigration reception centre and remained open for around 30 years. It's reckoned that over 11 million immigrants arrived at the port of New York and New Jersey and were processed by immigration authorities to become citizens of the new United States of America. We were taken to the north side of the island, which is the National Museum of Immigration. I have to say I was blown away by the scale of the operation that was undertaken to allow immigrants fleeing from war, persecution and famine in their own countries to settle in the land of the free. It was awe-inspiring and fascinating, and I felt a real connection with these people arriving in America at that time, because I had a similar feeling when I stood in Helmsdale, a small village in the northeast coast of Scotland, about 70 miles north of Inverness. But these people were not arriving in Scotland, but fleeing famine and the clearances of Scottish villages. They were the persecuted, the starving, the disowned, and were giving up everything to start a new life. And I've stood there on many occasions and looked up at the Helmsdale emigrant statue, a large bronze of a family preparing to embark on a ship and leave their homeland, heading for America, the promised land. The father is looking ahead towards the sea with his arm around his son, while his wife, with baby cradled in her arms, looks back at the croft house that they've just left, fearful for a journey into the unknown. The emigrant statue in Helmsdale is a poignant tribute to the thousands of Highlanders forced to leave their homes during the Highland clearances. So to witness this incredible reception centre in the middle of New York, giving hope to thousands and many from Scotland, was quite emotional. And it seems that this emotional journey that I was on was to continue, because after leaving Ellis Island, our guide took us for a tour of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. This sobering memorial to the Twin Towers' destruction pays tribute to those who lost their lives on that fateful day, and is an extremely moving testimony to man's inhumanity to man. As you approach the area where the Twin Towers once stood, the focal points are two pools, each nearly an acre in size, that sit in the footprints of the former North and South Towers. The pools contain the largest man-made waterfalls in North America, each descending 30 feet into a square basin. From there, the water in each pool drops another 20 feet and disappears into a smaller central void. The architect, who was Michael Arad, was quoted as saying, "The pools represent the absence made visible. Although water flows into the voids, they can never be filled. The sound of the cascading water makes the pools a place of tranquility and contemplation separate from the bustling noises of the city." Well, what an amazing way to remember those whose lives were cut short. Intriguingly, there are bronze parapets around both pools with the names of all those killed in this tragedy, and while we were walking along the side of one of the pools, I asked Nina why there were white roses sticking out of certain points in the broad surround. Our guide told us that on the birthdays of those killed, a rose is placed by their name. I mean, I could actually take up a whole podcast to tell you about this wonderful memorial, but I'll stop there and simply say that if you get the opportunity to visit New York, this is a must. I have to give Nina, our guide, a special mention, as she looked after us so well, and we were fascinated to learn that she also does escorted tours to India and Mexico. Amazing. If you're interested, get in touch and I'll give you her contact details. After a bit of a whirlwind tour of the city so far, we decided that the following day would be a little quieter, with a walk around the neighbourhood. But as it happens, two of my podcast listeners actually live in New York, and that was Laurie Norris and Barbara Lang, who were guests of mine last year when I took them for a day trip to Stirling Castle and then the Trossachs, which is a beautiful part of Scotland with mountains and lochs, and is often called the Highlands in miniature. Well, Laurie had been in touch previously and had invited us to join her on a tour. As it turns out, she's a Big Apple greeter, and she designed a visit for me, Pam and Deborah to view the skyscrapers of New York and Midtown Manhattan. It was an absolute delight to meet up with her again and Deborah, and instead of meandering around the city by ourselves, it was really great to have a guide to point out the various buildings and famous names as we walked around the skyscrapers. And the icing on the cake was that after a wonderful tour of the city, we were invited to join them for dinner at the University Club, a prestigious private club in the centre of Manhattan. The University Club of New York, which is normally known simply as the University Club, is a private social club at 1 West 54th Street and 5th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, so only a stone's throw from our hotel. It was founded to celebrate the union of social duty and intellectual life and was chartered in 1865 for the promotion of literature and art. We were very honoured to be invited by Laurie, and the dinner was superb, an end to the perfect day. Well, the following day was the 8th of April, and that's the date of my birthday. And what do you do on your birthday? Relax, perhaps chill out or visit a museum? No, instead we organised a bike tour of Central Park. Yes, a bicycle ride around Central Park, and I have to say it was superb. We actually used a company called Unlimited Biking and assumed that we'd turn up at Central Park and be provided with respective bicycles. So you can imagine our surprise when we found that Unlimited Biking was in the city, and once we'd taken charge of our bikes and met our guide, we then had to cycle our way through the New York traffic towards Central Park. Now, to be fair, it wasn't that long a bike ride, but it was still fun, and it was a bit exciting to be cycling through New York traffic amongst the towering skyscrapers. Now, a visit to Central Park is something I'd always wanted to do, so to be on a bike was just a little bit different, but it did not disappoint. We were in a group of about 10 of us, and we visited the famous sites such as Bath Cedar Fountain, Strawberry Fields, and the Onassis Reservoir. We also saw Cleopatra's Needle and the Shakespeare Garden. And the wonderful thing was that our guide was able to point out some of the more prestigious buildings at the edge of the park where famous people lived or had lived. And I was particularly taken by the Dakota Apartments, where John Lennon and Yoko Ono once lived, and sadly where he was shot and died. And just opposite the building, one of the entrances to the park leads you into the gardens, just a short walk from the entry, and on the pavement is a beautiful round black and white mosaic, and in the centre is one word, Imagine, which of course was one of John Lennon's most famous songs. And spookily enough, while we were there was a busker with his guitar singing that doleful song. I'm sorry I didn't get the gentleman's name to credit him for his song, but I did leave a gratuity for his lovely singing voice. And here's his version of Imagine.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No help below us. Above us on the sky. Imagine all the people living for today.
Well, thank you to the anonymous gentleman, and it was a nice end to our visit to the park, visiting the Imagine Memorial. Interestingly enough, that song has a connection with Scotland because it's widely believed to be inspired by John Lennon's childhood holidays that he used to spend in Durness visiting family. And Durness is way up in the far north of Scotland, in Mackay country as it happens. And right next to the village hall in Durness, there's a memorial garden dedicated to John Lennon, and the song Imagine is mentioned in that garden. The other building I noticed when we were cycling around, just off to the side of the park, was the Metropolitan Museum, another place that I wanted to visit but had not been on our itinerary at the time. So after the bike ride, we took a walk and popped into the Met and spent a lovely afternoon enjoying the exhibits. What a fabulous place. Now, although this was my birthday, we had decided to leave a special birthday dinner till the following day, because that evening we had been able to get tickets to the Summit One Vanderbilt experience. Now, Summit One Vanderbilt is New York City's newest observation deck, a skyscraper some 1,400 feet tall, and it's the tallest building in Midtown Manhattan. We were told the best experience is at sunset, so we arrived for about 8:30. The publicity stated that the experience would, and I quote, awaken our senses with 3 levels of immersive space that will challenge, inspire and thrill. In this immersive exhibition, be ready to surrender to new perceptions of what is possible. It certainly sounded like a lot of hype to me, but did it awaken the senses? Well, firstly, you ascend very quickly, ear-popping quickly, in a rather thrilling glass-bottomed elevator. And when you emerge from the elevator, you seem to step into a strange world of reflection, and it's a very eerie feeling, especially when you look down at the 30,000 square feet of mirrors, which gives you a totally different perspective. I got the feeling of floating, and as you ascend some escalators to the next floor, the glass bottom allows you to see everyone below, like ants swarming around their nest. Then you step out onto a glass-bottomed ledge, 1,100 feet above New York, with nothing between you and your doom other than a glass floor. Now that's not for the faint-hearted, I can tell you. And I recall our photos being taken and in the next room seeing ourselves among the clouds. The experience was surreal, but it was fun, and yes, I would recommend it. What a birthday I'd had. But after 15,000 steps and an hour biking around Central Park, my bed was most welcome that night. The following day started with a guided tour of Chelsea Market and the High Line. Chelsea Market was the original meatpacking district of New York and has grown from its humble beginnings to a more vibrant art scene, as well as having a huge variety of restaurants from which we sampled its amazing pastries, donuts and a range of Oriental foods. From there we climbed a set of stairs to reach an area called the High Line. Originally it was a freight line elevated above the streets on Manhattan's west side, and like most of old New York was due for demolition. However, the neighbourhood residents had another idea, and they saved it from the bulldozers to turn it into what is today an upper-level garden area mixed with art in an outdoor experience. And the High Line has a fascinating history because if you go back to the mid-1800s, freight trains on street-level tracks used to deliver food to Lower Manhattan. But with trains moving around open streets and a large number of pedestrians walking as well, many were killed, and 10th Avenue, for example, became known as Death Avenue. In response to the danger to pedestrians, the railroad hired men on horses nicknamed the West Side Cowboys, who patrolled 10th Avenue with waving red flags to warn of oncoming trains, not dissimilar to the red flag waving men who used to walk in front of automobiles when they were first introduced on the streets of the United Kingdom. In New York, by 1933, the street-level lines had been removed and an elevated train called the High Line was installed and transported millions of tons of meat and dairy. Eventually, trucks replaced trains and the High Line became redundant. It took a number of determined residents and a few years to convince local authorities to turn these old rail tracks into a public space. And I was delighted, as I'm sure many other tourists are, that the High Line was saved and is now a continuous, almost 2-mile-long greenway featuring 500 plus species of plants and trees. And I'd like to take my hat off to the friends of the High Line for this innovative and much enjoyed park. It's clearly been a success and apparently has become a global inspiration for other cities to transform unused industrial areas into dynamic public spaces. Well, after a lovely morning, we returned to our hotel for some rest in the afternoon, as I was about to experience a sumptuous birthday dinner at a secret location, followed by a real birthday treat of a Broadway show. I had not a clue where Pam had booked for dinner, and was surprised to see us enter a skyscraper at number 30 Hudson Yards. Then, another ear-popping experience in a super-fast lift catapulted us up 101 floors to a fabulous restaurant called The Peak. I think I can seriously use the words awe-inspiring and breathtaking in the same sentence, as we were shown to our table with stunning views of the city skyline and a view of the Hudson River down to the Statue of Liberty. I was truly blown away. The views and the food were exquisite, and we got chatting to other diners nearby who were visiting for special occasions. A couple on one side had just got engaged and clearly in love, and on the other side 3 girls also celebrating a birthday. It was a truly wonderful experience and all at around 1,300 feet. When we left, we returned to the hotel for a couple of hours, then went out again to continue the birthday treats. And what a treat, yes, we were off to the Kit Kat Club to see Cabaret. And what a spectacular show in the wonderful surroundings of this famous club and on Broadway. The name of the Kit Kat Club comes from the very stage show that we went to see, Cabaret. The show is set in Berlin in the 1930s, just as the Nazi Party were starting to rise and debauchery seemed to be the aim of the club. Well, the show we saw did not disappoint, with vibrant colours, extraordinary dancing and some of the most wonderful songs we've all come to love. What a way to end our holiday, mildly exhausted but still buzzing. And after walking through the streets of New York around midnight, we arrived at our oasis of calm, the Kimberley Hotel, and fell into bed. We departed New York the following day and returned directly to Edinburgh, where we were excited to be seeing our wee dog Minnie. My sister Morag had been looking after her for the week, but the welcome we received was, as you dog lovers out there will understand, ecstatic. It was lovely to be home, but New York now has a place in my heart. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this insight into a Scotsman's first impression of the city that never sleeps, the Big Apple, and as you can tell from my gushing enthusiasm, I had a ball. Now, back to Scotland and reality, and a return to my touring podcast series. In my next episode, I'm returning to finish off my series on Glasgow by bringing you a fascinating subject which allowed the wealth to literally flow into this city and beyond into Scotland, and that's called shipbuilding on the Clyde, where incredibly 25,000 ships were built from the late 18th century, which allowed Glasgow to become a powerhouse within the United Kingdom and the second city of the empire. This podcast has been a blast, and if any of my adventures resonate with you, please get in touch and let me know. I always welcome feedback, so if you wish to comment on any of the areas we've visited today, or if you wish me to cover any aspect of Scottish life, then please get in touch through the contact page of my website or send an email to john@exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. I have to say I'm very pleased to have heard from so many of you who have listened to the podcasts, and it's always great to meet some of you personally. I was so pleased to have met Laurie and Deborah in New York, and it just goes to show that friendly connections can reap so many rewards. Keep your messages of support coming, and don't forget, if you do intend visiting Scotland and want the best experience with a guide, then get in touch to discuss the possibility of a tour with me in a luxury Mercedes. And if you don't wish to have a formal guide, then perhaps one of my bespoke itineraries may help you plan a more spectacular holiday. I've been delighted to help Steve, Jane and Greg Curtis plan their fabulous holiday around Scotland by themselves, and I also look forward to meeting them in Edinburgh after their tour with my itinerary. And if you've followed any of my tour routes, then do send a photograph of you on part of your trip with your name, and I'll get it up on my social media. Thank you so much to those of you who have bought me a coffee, and if you wish to contribute in a small way to these podcasts, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Unique Scotland. That's buymeacoffee.com/Unique Scotland. All contributions are much appreciated. And please do share these Unique Scotland podcasts with friends and family. Well, I know I've strayed slightly from my normal Touring Scotland podcasts, but I hope you've enjoyed my wee trip around New York. In the last few days, I've just completed a tour of golf courses, castles and distilleries. Great combination, by the way, with a lovely couple, Greg and Robin Moss from America. It was a lovely trip, and as promised, Greg and Robin, you remembered as I raise a glass of Lagavulin to you and all my listeners, wherever you are in the world, Slanjava.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.